Hey there, this is Kenneth Moore, and you're now watching Zion's Watchman Media. And we are now on our next video in our series on the life of Moses. Okay, so what happened to Moses after he refused to grab hold onto the scepter of Egypt? The Bible tells us that he remained in the royal court up until the age of 40. During this time, the Egyptian tyranny towards his enslaved race came constantly before his eyes. This had created a deep burning desire within Moses to deliver his people, and because of this he was careful to guard his affections toward his stepmother and the Pharaoh, so that when the time would come for him to do his great work, he would not be hindered by his emotions. But even though Moses was being wise and guarding these feelings, the Bible tells us of a set of events that would soon set off that even he would not be able to control. We read about it here in Exodus chapter 2, starting with verse 11, which says, "And it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren, and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian, and hid him in the sand." Another act of injustice met the eyes of Moses, and now that deep burning fire within him was let loose. He looked this way and then to the other, and when he saw that all was clear, he killed the Egyptian with no witnesses except the Israelite who he had saved. But even though this act of killing the Egyptian may have given him some temporary satisfaction, this one rash act would cost him almost everything. The next day we read about how Moses was out and about again, and he saw two Israelites striving together or fighting together. And when rebuking the one that was obviously the guilty party of the two, the Israelites struck back. "Who made thee a prince and a judge to rule over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killest the Egyptian?" And Moses feared and said, "Surely this thing is known." In this, the mindset of Israel is here seen. You see, Moses, by his fiery act, had shown that he was willing to fight for the cause of Israel. And he hoped to some degree that the Israelites could understand how God would eventually use him in the future to deliver them from their oppressors. But they could not understand. You see, Israel at this time was not ready to be delivered. This interaction shocked Moses, for he knew that his crime of killing the Egyptian was spreading like wildfire. This news eventually reached to the ears of Pharaoh, and being greatly exaggerated, of course, it was said that Moses, through this act, intended to lead the Israelites against the Egyptians, overthrow the government, and set himself up upon the throne of Egypt. There could be no safety in Egypt so long as Moses lived, they said. So it was decided then and there by the Pharaoh that Moses should be put to death. But Moses, learning of his danger, quickly made his escape towards Arabia, to the land of Midian. Now wait, who were the Midianites? The Midianites, if you remember, were the son of a man named Midian, who was the son of Keturah, Abraham's second wife after Sarah's death. These Midianites eventually settled in the east, and it was to here that Moses fled to Arabia. While here, Moses ran into the 7 daughters of Jethro. Now, Jethro was a prince and a priest of the true God in Midian, and his daughters had come out to water their father's sheep. But they ran into some trouble with some rude shepherds, but thankfully Moses was there and ended up saving them. Due to this brave act, Moses was invited to the home of Jethro for bread, and later on the Bible tells us of how he became the son-in-law of this man by marrying his daughter Zipporah, who gave him a son named Gershom, which means a stranger or an exile, which Moses had become. And the Bible tells us of how Moses was content to stay with this man Jethro, and how he ended up working for him as a shepherd. Amazing. The high and mighty prince was now brought down to do the humble work of a shepherd. In this, God's providence is clearly seen, for up until this time, Moses was not ready to do the work of delivering Israel. Moses naturally had a hot temper, and in Egypt he had become accustomed to the luxury, flattery, ease, and the subtle influences of idolatry. These influences had shaped to some extent aspects of his character, and in this condition he could not be used by God. He could not use a man filled with self and with pride. If God was going to use Moses to deliver Israel, he would first have to cut him down and remove his self-sufficiency, and when he had been humbled, he would raise him back up again. For before honor, the Bible says, comes humility. Through nature, the work of a shepherd, and close communion with the Almighty, Moses' negative traits could be removed, and the wilderness would be the perfect school for him among the mountains of Midian. Now, it is true that the education that Moses received in the courts of Egypt would help him later on, but the truth is that the education that he would receive here in the wilderness would outweigh all of the books of Egypt, for here, in doing the humble work of a shepherd, he would learn how to care for the weak and wounded. He would also learn how to work with the stubborn and defiant. During this time, Moses would cultivate things such as self-forgetfulness, meekness, and faith. Faith, trusting not in human wisdom or human strength for the victory, but upon the promises of God. During this time, Moses became humble and reverent. The Bible speaks of him that he became very meek above all the men which were upon the face of the earth. Now, what is the application for our time today? Did you know that God is now preparing a people through trial and discipline so that they will, like Moses, become devoid of self, so that God can use them later on to give the loud cry of Revelation chapter 18, a cry of deliverance, but this time not from the king of Egypt, but from the king of Babylon, the so-called king that has held God's people in the bondage of error throughout the centuries. So the question to you is this: are you like Moses, being trained in the school of humility so that God can later raise you up to finish this final great work? The answer lies with you. This has been Kenneth Moore from Zion's Watchman Media, and as always, until next time.